There are many naval artifacts on display on the former Mare Island Naval Shipyard, and one is worth your time to check out. It is in historic Alden Park, and while you must know where to look, it is worth it. The artifact is an anchor lost by a British warship in the year 1740 during the somewhat bizarre 9-year war fought between England and Spain, known as the War of Jenkin's Ear. In 1731, Spanish captain Juan de Leon Fandino lashed the British captain Robert Jenkins to the mast of his ship, and using Jenkins' own sword, slashed his ear off for alleged smuggling. That incident provoked a war and led directly to the presence of the anchor in Alden Park. It is the circumstances surrounding the loss and recovery of that anchor that make it one of the most interesting artifacts on the shipyard. The tale begins on October 19, 1739, when England declared war on Spain in response to the incident. 1 month later, Commodore Anson of the 60-gun, fourth-rate HMS Centurion was summoned to the Admiralty in London. He was ordered to lead an expedition of 6 ships and 1,959 men and boys to harass and seize Spanish possessions in the Pacific, Americas, and Asia. The following year, the expedition departed England for the Pacific by way of the storm-swept Cape Horn. The anchor that is on display in the park was referred to as the best anchor and was one of 2 on the bow of the Centurion as she commenced her voyage. The trip around Cape Horn was fraught with peril as the 6 ships and crews fought constant storms for nearly 3 months as they battled to reach the Pacific. During their passage, the small fleet was battered mercilessly by tremendous winds and waves. The weather was so bad that the ships were soon separated, with 2 eventually turning back. The Centurion continued alone, battling headwinds and massive seas. The men became sick with scurvy, and typhus began decimating the crew. At one point, Centurion was struck by 2 massive waves. The ship rolled so far that her cargo shifted, leaving her with a permanent list and threatening her with sinking. Her diminished crew was forced to reposition her stores in the raging seas to right the ship. Having survived those waves, she was then struck by a huge bolt of lightning that raced across the upper deck, injuring many of the sailors. Miraculously, the battered ship and crew made it through to the Pacific, and Commodore Anson set course for Juan Fernandez Island, of Robinson Crusoe fame, off the coast of Chile. As the ship finally rounded Cape Horn, half of the original crew had died. The ship's sails were nearly all blown out, her rigging was damaged, and her masts were sprung, requiring significant repairs. Following their arrival at the island, the Centurion was anchored, and most of her surviving crew moved ashore to recover from their ordeal. Then, a violent storm struck, and the anchor rod for one of the 2 bow anchors parted. Fortunately, the other anchor held, as the skeleton crew on board the ship would likely not have been able to operate the ship, and the rest of the crew would have likely become castaways. After several more months of repairs to the ship, and the opportunity for the ailing crew to recover, the Centurion was reunited with the remaining vessels of the fleet, and she went on to harass the Spanish, eventually capturing a Spanish galleon. Meanwhile, the waves of the Pacific relentlessly washed over the lost anchor for 142 years. During that time, the United States declared our independence from Great Britain and fought both the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 with England. In addition, decades later, our nation was torn asunder by the horror and devastation of the Civil War. Then, in 1882, the screw-sloop warship USS Lackawanna, operating out of Mare Island, anchored in the same bay on Robinson Crusoe Island, and when they hoisted their anchor, it was found to also be entangled in the Centurion's lost anchor. For unknown reasons, the crew saved the anchor and brought it with them when they returned to Mare Island. They transferred the anchor ashore and it was put on display in Alden Park across from the headquarters building, where it sits to this day, all but forgotten, surrounded by vegetation behind a bench on the west side of the park. So, if you get a chance next time you are near Alden Park, check this artifact from a bizarre war fought over 280 years ago in response to Spanish officers lashing the British captain Robert Jenkins to the mast of his ship and slashing his ear off with his own sword for alleged smuggling.